Matt and Greg used to interview movie stars, but now they're doing a podcast.
Welcome, everyone. This is another episode of Matt and Greg used to interview movie stars.
Yes, it is. I'm Matt Levitz.
I'm Greg Srisavasti. I always sound excited with every episode. This episode is I call it the bonding episode.
Really? So the Bond episode wasn't the bonding episode?
Very good. That was 007. That's episode 007.
Right.
Very good. This one is very special for me because this is a movie that you and I both covered. We were there, Matt Levitz.
Right. We weren't there at any of the others?
We were kind of, but we actually bonded in this trip. This was a out-of-town experience for both of us, don't you think?
Well, all of our out-of-town experiences were out-of-town experiences.
Well, and this had it was a very spacey time for both of us.
I don't remember interviewing Kevin Spacey for Apollo 13. So in this show, we're going to be talking to producer Brian Grazer, Kathleen Quinlan, Gary Sinise, and Kevin Bacon. This is part 1 of 2. We have other interviews that we're going to talk about in our companion episode.
And I remember you IMing me. Do people still IM each other these days, Matt, Mr. Levitz?
I certainly don't. I don't know where that came from.
I'm sorry. You Facebook messaged me telling me how great these Apollo 13 interviews are.
I was lying.
You were not lying.
No.
I listened to these interviews. Very, very good interviews. Very honest interviews as well. So I'm excited to bring these interviews to the listener.
I'm glad you appreciate that. I always preferred it when people lied left and right. That's just more fun for me. Before we get to that, though, we do have our Junket Talk segment.
Right.
And what I wanted to talk about today was some of the trips that we took. We did a lot of out-of-town trips. The studios would fly us. And we are going to talk about how that worked in a little more detail in a future episode. I want to keep this one kind of more anecdotal about some of the different places that we went. And why don't we
start?
Those
were good times. Those were really good times. I'm thinking the 90s. That was pretty much the only time in my adult life where I was able to travel to different parts of the States.
Certainly with that level of frequency. I've done it some, but I mean, when you're on your own dime, it's not as easy. And, you're certainly not staying in places nearly as nice. I go on a vacation with my family maybe once a year, maybe once every other year. When we were Junketeers, we were doing this once a month.
And we were doing it once a month, sometimes listeners even twice a month. We would stay at usually Park Avenue hotels in NYC. That's short for New York City, I believe. The Big Apple?
No, I think you're right.
No, but we would actually be holed up in some of the best, most luxurious hotels in the Big Apple. And those were the days, as they say.
Yeah, that was fun. And we got to see a lot of America. We didn't go out of the States other than Toronto, I guess, and Mexico.
Mexico I did not do. Toronto, listeners, that's for the Toronto Film Festival. Usually back in the day when they had the film festival going, a lot of press junkets would occur concurrently with the film festival. So
they had the stars all in one place already, so They just brought us to where they were. And it was fun for us to kind of walk around. We did not get all access passes. We couldn't go to the other screenings or the other press conferences. We were really kind of limited to what they invited us to cover.
Right. There was one year, though, when I went, and you didn't go, Matt, where I actually got an all-access pass. And all I did when I was there for the week was watch movies all around Toronto. Just Miramax films, all different kind of studios. And I'd do a whole bunch of interviews as well. So
you spent your vacation time doing exactly what you do at home.
Exactly. The only difference was Toronto was a cleaner city than New York. All apologies to New York. But I remember it being very clean, a little bit cold for my taste, but very, very clean and nice. Toronto. Yeah. So
I do remember sometimes groups of us would kind of go out and explore the city. We would do this anywhere we went. In Toronto, I remember we went up to the CN Tower. It's really tall. There's a glass bottom floor, and we were all very scared to step out into what seemed like empty space.
I never did that. I have heard
it was frightening. And I remember we all tried ketchup flavored potato chips.
Was it good?
No.
Oh. That sounds exactly how it sounds. Horrible. I don't know. I hope that's not a big delicacy in Toronto. Ketchup flavored potato chips.
I don't know.
What is that about?
Well, they were there. We had never seen them before. It was fascinating, and it tasted like you were drinking ketchup.
Yeah, but most of our out-of-town, that's horrible. I'm just thinking about it right now. Most of our out-of-town trips were
it could have been worse. It could have been mayonnaise.
But most of our trips were centered up and around New York. Like you were saying, Matt, a couple of times they were not in New York. You were saying Florida is one of them.
Went to Orlando, Florida a couple of times. I actually tell a really good story about that on our webpage and on the Q&A page. But the quick version of it is they brought us to Universal Studios Orlando, and they closed the park down to the public, but they kept it open for us. And most of the Junketeers just kind of hung out around the karaoke bar, and they just sang all night. But
Did you sing, Matt? Did you sing?
No, I skipped that. I went on the rides because there were no lines. I mean, what a great opportunity. So there was a group of 4 of us, and we were just going from ride to ride and just walking straight on. And we were the only ones on the rides because nobody else was doing this, and we just had the time of our lives.
Wow, that's so you actually told the story on mattandgregpodcast.com.
Very good. I notice you're looking at your laptop as you say that.
I'd rather look at the laptop than look at you, Matt. I mean,
I
it's
don't blame you, but I mean, do you have our URL memorized, or did you have to look that up?
What's the next topic, Matt? We have.
Well, let's see. Let's talk about Hawaii.
I've never done that.
They didn't send you to Hawaii?
Did you do the what is the bird movie with what's his face, Buddy Hackett, or Buddy Hackett? No, you didn't do that. Remember, he did a bird movie with Jay Moore. I forgot what it was called.
Oh, Polly?
Polly, I think that's it.
No, I didn't do Polly.
But you went to Hawaii. The bottom line.
I did. Twice. I went for Air Force One and I went for Pearl Harbor. What I remember, I combined that. You could sometimes extend your trips on your own dime if you wanted to.
Did you?
Yes.
Oh.
I did that sometimes in New York, but I did it at the Pearl Harbor junket because I have family out in Hawaii. So the studio pays for your flights, so you're already going to be there. And then all you need to do is cover, if you stay extra days, then you have to pay for the hotel. But because I had family out there, I stayed with the family. So I just changed the days that I flew out and flew back. And what wound up happening with Pearl Harbor is I had already been there for a week, and then we did the junket, which was 1 or 2 days or whatever. And then they invited us to stay for the premiere. And the premiere was going to be like 4 or 5 days later. And they said to all the Junketeers, if you don't need to go back, if you don't have work or obligations, then just stay and we'll pay for you. And so we got like 4 or 5 nights free in this hotel with no responsibilities. We just got to enjoy Hawaii in this amazing hotel right there on the beach. These extra days prior to going to a big Hollywood premiere in Hawaii. So that was pretty awesome.
So listeners, here's the thing. If you really want to get into radio and believe that this whole radio junket thing will lead you to maybe a week and a half of Hawaii time prior, you'll get to cover the junket and go to the premiere. We're talking about a time that has gone by. They don't do that anymore, unless maybe even if you're TV, and if that, the highest echelon of TV reporters and outlets, but they don't do that for radio anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the point of the show, is we're talking about a bygone era. None of this really exists anymore to the extent that it did back then. It exists in a sort of a lower version.
Yeah, those were halcyon days.
Ooh.
That was the first and last time I'm going to use the word halcyon, Matt. Halcyon. Those were halcyon days.
You said that was the first and last time, and then you used it like 5 more times.
I'm so sorry about that. Our Houston trip was also memorable.
Yep. And it was mostly memorable because it was for, which movie was that again?
Apollo 13.
That was it.
Which we should be covering right now, I think. Maybe.
Well, that's a good transition. Now, what do you remember about our Houston trip?
I remember us visiting, I guess you were saying, the space station or something. We had a nice tour of the facilities.
Right.
I took a couple of photos. And to be honest, that was 23 years ago. I don't remember anything else about Apollo 13. Just remembering that we were in Texas for a couple of days. Horrible.
One of my main memories, and I think I said this in the last episode at the very end, they wanted to show us the movie Babe about the pig, and nobody wanted to see it because it sounded like a kid's movie. It sounded dumb, and everyone was complaining.
Yeah.
But this was Universal, and they had us all trapped, and they said, this is on the itinerary. We've flown you here. We're paying for you. You have to go. So they put us all on a bus, and everyone was kind of dour about it. And then everyone loved the movie. We just had a great time. It was a total surprise to all of us.
I remember that. I do remember that.
So, yeah, we wound up loving the movie, and we weren't so upset that they did that to us anymore.
I just remember around that time, we didn't have too much time to explore Houston. It was basically the hotel wherever we were staying at
And the Space Center.
and the Space Center, and that's it.
More importantly, we did some really good interviews.
Yeah. So the first interview is
Brian Grazer,
Brian Grazer.
the producer.
Yes.
So, Greg, if you have that IMDb page up in your mind, of
In my
course,
mind,
as
in
we
my
know,
mind.
we're not actually cheating and looking at things. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Brian Grazer and what he's done?
I mean, Brian Grazer is basically known as the lifelong producing partner of Ron Howard. So a lot of you guys remember him from, I mean, if it's usually directed by Ron Howard, it's produced by Brian Grazer, but he's done...
That's Imagine Entertainment, right? They run that company together.
Imagine Entertainment. So yeah. So this was a big move. Like prior to this, he produced Far and Away with Howard and the Tom Cruise film. That wasn't the biggest hit in the world, but this one was a huge hit. This Apollo 13 was a huge hit.
Sure. Now, what are some of the movies that Brian Grazer has produced without Ron Howard?
I mean, we're going to talk about it he talks about it in the upcoming interview that we have.
I know what you're going to say.
The Boomerang was a movie that he collaborated with Eddie Murphy. There's some really honest Eddie Murphy stuff going on during the interview. A little bit of a tease for you guys to listen to this Brian Grazer interview. A lot of you guys won't want to listen to producers or writers, but this is actually a very candid interview with Grazer. So this comes highly recommended.
So do you have any more bio stuff you want to say, Greg?
That's about it on Brian Grazer.
Okay, well then, why don't we start getting into it?
Apollo 13 was nominated for 9 Oscars, including Best Picture, but it only won 2 for editing and sound mixing. It lost Best Picture to Braveheart.
Brian Grazer is the first of all of these interviews to talk about the KC-135, otherwise known as the Vomit Comet. And incidentally, Greg, that is what I called my ex-wife during her first pregnancy.
That's funny.
But it's also what she called me during her cesarean. To explain what the KC-135 is, it's a Boeing 4-engine turbojet stratotanker. NASA commissioned this aircraft when they started the reduced gravity program in 1959. The KC-135 is used to understand the role of gravity on humans and hardware in space, and it's also used to train astronauts how to function in zero gravity and to get them acclimated to the physical feeling of it. Now, this is an airplane. It's not a spacecraft, so it never leaves the atmosphere. What it does is it flies in what's called parabolic arcs, meaning it climbs really, really high, and then it dives down at such a fast speed that it creates weightlessness inside the plane. Or, in technical terms, the aircraft does not exert any ground reaction force on its contents. Sounds good, right?
Sounds very good.
Okay. Of course, it can't fly straight down indefinitely because it would crash into the ground. So it does that as long as it can, which is about 20 to 25 seconds, and then it pulls out of the nosedive and starts climbing again. And it keeps doing this up and down like a roller coaster. During a typical mission of 2 to 3 hours, they'll do this like 30 to 40 times. Apollo 13 was the very first cinematic production to ever bring movie cameras onto the KC-135 and to film actors in there pretending to be floating weightless in space. Reportedly, the cast and crew of Apollo 13 flew between 500 and 600 parabolic arcs, for a total of 3 hours and 56 seconds of weightless footage, 20 to 25 seconds at a time. So anyway, that's the science of it. Greg, why don't you explain why they call it the Vomit Comet?
Well, people just throw up on the thing. And what you're going to listen to the interview, a lot of these actors who... I don't even want to spoil who did not vomit or who really enjoyed it, but I guess you guys can really figure out which one, the one who was most, personally invested in the project. But a lot of the actors threw up on while doing the Vomit Comet stuff.
They did, but it was all worth it because it looks amazing. And you would think, because it looks so great, that a bunch of movies after this one would probably rush to copy them, right?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't. For a few reasons. Partly because it's so expensive. Partly because CG was invented, and now that's what everyone uses for special effects, and you don't have to do it practically. And partly because it made the actors physically sick, and no one really wants to do it. Now, there were rumors that Christopher Nolan used it in Inception, but they weren't true. He didn't. He used other tricks for that hallway fight. There were also rumors that Alfonso Cuarón used it for Gravity, but again, he didn't, mostly because he needed takes that were longer than 20 to 25 seconds. And in fact, the only actual instance I can find where Hollywood went back and used the Vomit Comet again was just last year. Greg, you want to try to guess what it was?
Oh, no. I can't even...
I'll give you a hint. Who is the actor who is so crazy in doing all of his own stunts that he would suggest something like this?
Okay, so that's the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible.
You're half right. Tom Cruise, The Mummy.
Oh, okay, wow.
It was the airplane crash scene.
Oh, that's crazy.
And remember, the airplane was flipping over and over and again, and they were kind of floating around.
Yeah, I saw a little bit in the trailer. I didn't see the movie, but I wonder if he threw up during that sequence.
I don't know. But yeah, they used the KC-135 for that. They used the Vomit Comet. And as far as I can tell, that's the only other time Hollywood has used it.
That is some great knowledge that I did not know, Matt. Congratulations on that. You know what? Now I want to see The Mummy, just because of that stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Okay.
The only other thing I want to say in preparation is right at the end, he talks very briefly about 2 other movies that he was about to release. And they are Fear, which starred Mark Wahlberg and Reese Witherspoon and was directed by James Foley, and Sergeant Bilko, which had Steve Martin, Dan Aykroyd, and Phil Hartman. Sergeant
Bilko, that was a huge hit. I asked him that question on James Foley, working with James Foley on Fear.
Oh, was that you?
My random question, Matt.
Oh.
So, yeah, I love that movie.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, without further ado...
Here's Brian Grazer.
I was going to say that.
Sorry.
A lot of cooperation from NASA.
Yes.
Did that affect how you told the story? Would you have told it differently without that degree of cooperation?
That's a great question. Well, I'm struggling because it would have made it really hard to tell the story without the cooperation, and I'm on right on the verge of saying impossible, but nothing's impossible. But on some level, it would have been impossible. I'll tell you why. Because it was critical to Ron Howard and to Tom Hanks that we created this partnership in the very beginning between Ron, Tom, and myself, so that Tom wasn't only just the giant movie star of the movie. He was also, in a sense, sort of the guy. He was the guiding vision and truth police of the movie, and it was critical for Tom that everything adhered to the absolute accuracy of the event and the course of events as they're related to the Apollo 13 and in and around the fabric of in that time. So if you didn't have NASA and going to that, it might have been really hard because he might have maybe he wouldn't have done it. Because if you don't have NASA, then you might not be able to. It'd be harder to ratify the fact that it's a true story. It'd just be harder.
But were there some points where they said they'd look at things and say, well, we want to provide you this, but we really don't want to show that aspect of what happened. We want to show things in a better light.
Well, it started that way. It started not necessarily in a better light, but they would scrutinize various aspects of the movie or the storytelling of the movie as it related to authenticity. But I think what was good is we started off on the right foot. We came here right off on our location recce. We got to know everybody, and we paid a lot of attention to everybody in the bureaucratic hierarchy at NASA here and in Washington, in fact. So it just started off on the right foot. We just didn't come in here and say, oh, we're going to shoot here for 2 days, and we're going to Cape Kennedy, and we're going to shoot there a few days, and we're going to make it in Hollywood, and blah, 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 blah. We actually were interested in what they had to say. We're actually interested in getting all of their points of view, and it was sort of critical for the actors to understand how it all worked so that it would so they understood the motivation of their characters.
When it came to the logistics of shooting this, I was trying to get it from the notes. To shoot the weightlessness,
Yes.
was that done each and every time, doing that G-force exercise that you have to do in the airplane?
Yes, it was done each and every time, and you'll have a lot of fun talking to Tom and Ron about that. We didn't know. We thought we started the movie thinking that we would do it digitally, essentially. Where we would have the guys on wires, and we would digitally remove the wires. And we thought with technology the way it is, it would maybe be slightly more advanced than that, because our technology keeps changing. But we kept working on NASA continually once we understood that they did have this KC-135, and they eventually and generously acceded to our wishes and allowed us to use this KC-135. And what you get out of that is I asked Hanks this flying in, but he didn't. I don't know if he remembered for sure. You're at about 40,000 feet, and then you start to dive. And as you start to dive, is when you get your 23 seconds of weightlessness, which approximately 18 seconds of that 23 seconds is shootable screen time. Then you piece it all together after you've done, several hundred of these parabolas, and you have what you saw in the movie. I'm not sure, maybe 10 or 12 minutes of film time where they're actually at zero gravity. But it goes very slowly, when I made Splash, we had to do underwater sequences. So the shooting is very slow, just like that. Splash, we shot maybe 3 weeks for limited amount of screen time of underwater, where you swim from respirator to respirator. It's a similar type of filming process.
Is this a first?
It's the very first time that, actually, as Spielberg says, because he would come to our set all the time, he'd go, it's the first time that science and cinema has been blended together or married, So it is the first time that the KC-135 has been used to produce zero gravity for a movie.
How did your actors hold up under those circumstances?
Well, a few of them initially got sick, but they have this scope deck. It's a medicine that will prevent that, but not 100% prevent it. We had Annie Leibovitz came up to do a shoot, and apparently she got sick, threw up like 5 or 6 times, just kept going at it. It was terrible.
Well, Bill Paxton was just practicing for his scene later.
And Hanks, he got sick once. He was the most enthusiastic about doing this. He is, it kind of goes without saying, but he's the consummate professional actor. He was aggressive about wanting to do anything that would help produce authenticity in the movie. So he was quite enthusiastic about it.
Have the three of you worked together again since between Splash and this?
Not the three of us, no.
Was there a sense of camaraderie, though, since the Carries?
Yes. Well, because we're friends. We've stayed friends. I mean, Hanks and I, we live a mile from each other. And then we have beach houses that are about 200 yards from each other. And we surf together. So we've stayed friends since Splash. So there's always been this sort of constant, communication and rhythm.
But how has the filmmaking process for the three of you changed?
He's gotten really smart. He's gotten so smart that we're now trying to keep up with him a little bit. And he's smart in the sense that he's a fast reader. He's got a really... his learning arc is extraordinary, and his memory is... So he's able to gather a lot of information, assimilate it, process it, and be able to use it faster than anybody. So he can read a book that's like... He read that space book that, I don't know, it's maybe 800 pages. He read that in a day and could remember everything about it. So you have to keep up with that. That's really hard.
How did you change as a producer?
I've just become, it's hard to articulate, probably just slightly more, my standard of quality might be higher. Since your standard of quality has a free-floating definition, I might be able to, I probably understand that better. What that means, quality. And I think it's hard to say. I've become much more sophisticated at dealing with and balancing, dealing with stars and star directors and understanding how to do that as it relates to making a movie more efficiently.
Can you be specific with that? Does it mean
Well, because movies are a people business. They involve people, and stars set the tone and pace of a movie. They set the tone in. If Tom didn't care about authenticity, then no one else would really care about authenticity. If Ron didn't care about authenticity, then there'd be, and Ron and Tom did, then there'd be a rub between the two of them, and then that would involve, then I'd have to be more involved in that way. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, well...
Or I think I missed one part of it.
Yeah, you're talking about someone's professional approach, but you're also dealing with personality. So Kevin Bacon is completely different from Tom Hanks.
Right.
Or whatever.
Yes. Well, okay, that's the one thing that I probably do really well as a producer. Even comparing to all of my peers, I think that might be a strength, and that I understand that each one of these, each actor is its own individual and discrete business. And I learned this, from working with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks and Steve Martin and big stars. And so, therefore, making them happy, first of all, is quite easy for me. I don't find that, you have to sublimate to them to some degree. And it's easy for me because it's not that I'm a fan, but they can do a magical thing. And for me, even after having done 40 movies, I still find that to be quite extraordinary, and that when somebody can do something that's almost a non-human behavior, and the people that I mentioned have the talent and the charisma to do that. So it's easy for me to do that. Going back to your exact question. Making sure, trying to make sure that Tom Hanks is happy, that there are not unnecessary things that are causing him stress or that would affect the clarity of his performance or vision or execution of his performance or vision is something that producers are supposed to do. And I understand that and do it. And so then I would do that with all the actors, and Ed Harris has his own set of things that he needs done, and they're all different. And since you have since stars have a big antenna for the truth, you have the truth, and they're also slightly impatient. You have to assess that almost immediately, like on first contact. You have to sort of assess what makes Ed Harris nuts and what makes him happy, does he like the AD knocking on the trailer 5 minutes or 15 minutes? Does it matter to him if he's got to stand on the set and wait for 15 minutes? Some stars don't care. Some really care. So I have to be sensitive to all that and instruct people that work for me to be aware of those things.
Had you worked with Eddie Murphy before this project?
Yes, I produced Boomerang, which Ron and I were talking about that because some people think it was actually a very successful movie. It cost $30 million and did $150 million worldwide. But I have worked with him, yes, on that movie.
Has he changed because he has gotten a lot of flack from making?
He has changed. I don't know about from the flack, but we changed. I mean, he and I vowed to never work with him of all the actors I've ever worked with since after Boomerang. But I am working with him. And I love it, right? I think you will like him. He's actually shows up either on time or early, and he is working so hard. And what's relevant there is that this movie is actually challenging his talent because he has so much talent. And the reason I'm working with him is you look around how many people really have talent, and there's not that many that have that kind of magical talent that I was referring to. He does, and he's amazingly charismatic. And in the movie The Nutty Professor, it tests his talent in a way that's really exciting.
Why did you make...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, why did you kind of answered it. You said why you are working with him, but why did you make the vow to not work with him, and then what changed your opinion?
Because on Boomerang, he was extremely difficult. He treated people in a way that I didn't respect. He was always okay with me, because I'm a boss, but he wasn't okay with everybody else. He doesn't degrade anybody. He's not one of those stars that makes somebody feel bad publicly, which some people, that can. He doesn't do that. but he ices people out. He's late. He does things that are just, to me, are unprofessional. He makes people really scared. He thrives on, but on this movie, he's not. He comes to the set with a big smile. He's happy, infects the set with positive energy. And but he and I had a long, several long talks before we started this movie, and but that's why I didn't. I was very upset about that. There's certain, I think I'm a pretty nice guy. I have to work at it, whereas my partner Ron Howard doesn't. He just is nice. I think I am, but I have to work at it a bit. But there's certain things that make me insane, where I just cannot tolerate it. As a producer, I just won't tolerate it. And he would do things that I found to be intolerable to others. This set on this movie here. Yeah. Thank you for moving that. But this set was great. It was. Not only was it a positive set to work on, but it was the most professional set. But all the actors kind of knew that, and that was a criterion for us in terms of putting this team together. Because once Tom Hanks fell in and said, "Gee," he said, "Yeah, I'll make this movie," pretty much everybody, all the other male leading actors in Hollywood wanted to work on it. Because you get to be an astronaut, which is kind of macho and cool, and there hasn't really been an astronaut movie ever. There was one movie about test pilots, The Right Stuff. I learned what an astronaut was on the course of the movie and how to differentiate between an astronaut and a test pilot. But going back to the original question, so what we really wanted is to create a team of actors that first of all, they had to have a presence, a big presence, because they don't get to talk all the time. So you had to be captivated by them, interested in them, even when they're not talking. The other thing, along the lines of after the talent and behavior and all that, you had to find a team of individuals that knew it was going to be hard. I mean, we're on a soundstage; it's 34 degrees for a month, and you're in a little teeny capsule, all tight and wrapped, in a spacesuit. It's just so uncomfortable. And there are days that Kevin Bacon didn't get to talk, and there are days that Bill Paxton didn't get to talk, and there might have been a day that Tom Hanks didn't get to talk. You couldn't have any showboats. And we had a few actors that wanted to do this before, early on, that are really, really good actors that star in movies, that wanted to be. And it's just, you could tell they were 3-point players, and that's not wrong for them. It just was wrong for our movie.
You probably don't want to mention any names.
No, I probably don't. Well, no, I don't. They're great actors. It's just that, it's just not suitable to. That wouldn't have been suitable for our movie.
The times, the political times, seem to be coming into play, I think, at the time that you're being released, because I have a feeling that the people like Robert Dole and Newt Gingrich, who've been so critical of Hollywood, will point to this and say, here's an example of what you can do. How do you feel about that whole debate and what you think Apollo 13 is going to fit into?
Well, where Apollo 13 will fit in is I do think the country, in terms of the time, the culture, the society, the politics, the country is ready to fully embrace this movie. Because it is really patriotic. It's unifying. But I think where everybody I think the access point for it is that it deals with self-empowerment, and that's probably the thing that I was most interested in when I wanted to make the movie. Is I'm always interested in movies or subjects or literature that involves self-empowerment. These three guys go out into outer space. They go out for the country, essentially, for the nation. And they're presented a situation where it seems as though they're going to die, and they are able to summon all the resources inside of them to prevent that. And I like movies that involve that dynamic because I believe in it.
Does it bother you, though, that politicians may pick it up and say, see, here's what you should be doing, and rub this in the nose of
I don't like that too much, no. Yeah. I wouldn't like that to become a tool for their platform. Because the Dole, his remarks, it's to me, it's so remedial. I mean, it's a guy that's grasping. It's someone that's grasping to try to find a way to enhance his platform. So he chooses Hollywood. That's so convenient. Why doesn't he solve a problem? Work on a real problem. Education. Work on something that actually is solvable. This is freedom of speech. I mean, it's a ridiculous kind of thing for him to lash out at. It's just a convenient kind of remedial thing for him to do. Involves very little thought or invention.
Well, along with that, he's painting Hollywood in such broad strokes, giving no credit to the fact that there's a lot of diversity of kinds of movies. Even if he wanted to say there are certain movies that he personally disapproves of, to not even acknowledge that there's a whole slew of, quote, family-friendly, I think was the term he used, pictures.
Look, I know, and for the most part, I'm a producer that is well known for making positive-spirited movies. So, if I would be a companion to that idea, and I still can't embrace what he's saying because it's a jerky thing to say or do. It's so jerky, because even when people lash at a television, there are good programs or programs, and even if they're not. And how do you define what is good? If they're just entertaining or they're escapism, it's so annoying to me. It's hard to synthesize my point of view, but I think you get it. It's clear you get it. Anyway.
Brian, can you just quickly talk about what drew you into working with James Foley and Mark Wahlberg?
Well, a lot of movies that I work on are James Foley. It was mostly that I think he chooses intense subject matters, like at Close Range or Glengarry Glen Ross, and he is very successful at dealing with actors in an intense subject matter. So what I thought I would do is I would marry him to a genre movie, because that's what this movie is, No Fear. It's a very intense movie that escalates itself into being a lot like Straw Dogs in some sense, in the way in the 90s. And so I thought he would be very successful with that material.
How did that made your work?
Great. The movie is so good. It blows me away. The guy is an unbelievably effective director. It's a really, really, ultimately scary movie. It actually does scare you, which is successful for me. And it's going to be really controversial. Some people won't like. Some people will be very mad at it. I like it because I think it teaches the right lesson. Because you start off rooting for these kids, the girl and the boy, the girl and the boy, and they should feel like they should be able to make their choices to who they, that they want to be together. And by the end, even all these rowdy kids that go to movies, even gangers and stuff, they all side with the dad. It's just amazing to see the shift in the audience. They all end up choosing, they all gravitate towards the proper sort of moral direction. Even gangers, and I loved that. Because I actually believe that all people are good. You just have to find a way, to tap into that. And a lot of it's cultural, It's no one's fault. Everyone has their own rational direction for why they are what they are. That's the way I view it.
You also have Sergeant Bilko.
I do. I have Sergeant Bilko going. We're going to Las Vegas. Went to Las Vegas today. Sergeant Bilko is just all funny, flat out funny. Every scene just goes for the jugular as far as that goes. Steve Martin is wonderful, and he's wonderful. Okay, we're done.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so that was Brian Grazer. Good interview.
I think out of all the stuff that we've had so far on our episodes, it's probably the most candid, refreshingly honest take. I wonder how much from your library we're going to actually have like on this level of honesty.
This was by far the most honest interview we have heard on this episode so far.
But I'm just saying, on our treasure trove, I'm not trying to be depressing you, because it's going to be hard to reach a Brian Grazer level of honesty, I think.
Well, we'll use that as the litmus test.
The litmus test.
From now on, we'll just compare everything to Brian Grazer. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Brian Grazer.
Yes, he is the man. I love that hair, the little porcupine hair that he has. So, going from Eddie Murphy, Boomerang, working with Tom Hanks, Ron Howard, we're now talking about one of the principal actors of the film.
Yes, Kathleen Quinlan. She played Marilyn Lovell, who was Jim Lovell's wife. He was played, of course, by Tom Hanks, and we'll get to him in episode 2. Kathleen Quinlan, Greg, fill us in.
I don't have much to say about Kathleen Quinlan, but I will want to say something because I'm vain and narcissistic and all those bad things. I did ask her a pretty good question. Ooh. So this is another reason to listen to the interview. I specifically asked her a question that I would never ask her today. I asked her during the interview if she is more jaded or passionate about her work being a veteran actress these days. And she actually gave a pretty good answer.
Now, why would you not ask that today?
Because I'm a coward.
Oh, well, that's true.
I'd say how's your day going? Tell me about your favorite scene in the movie.
No, a professional would never ask that question.
I love that question, by the way. Postscript, I swear I'm trying to get along with everybody.
Her bio, then. What are some of the things that she's done? She's
basically known for a lot of, back in the day, she did this movie called I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. That's when this is off the top.
Total lie, by the way. She absolutely promised me a rose garden.
Yeah, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. Do you remember that book?
I don't. Yeah, I know the title.
Yeah, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. That was released in 1977. She basically became popular from that film. She was also featured in Twilight Zone the movie, a bunch of different films. Sunset, which a 1988 film that I actually went to, starring James Gardner, and my favorite Bruce Willis. She was in that movie. Did you ever see Sunset? 1988.
If I did, I don't remember.
Very good movie. I remember really appreciating the money I spent for that film. Most people really hated that movie, but Apollo 13 actually brought her back into, I guess, I'm not saying the good graces, back into the spotlight for her portrayal. After that, she went on to actually star in a lot of films as a character actress. A lot of the reasons why she doesn't star in a lot of films is because she actually went off to become more of a mom and a family woman. So she and her husband would actually balance their work, as you will see from this interview.
Well, yeah, and I did want to mention her husband. She's married to another actor, Bruce Abbott, and horror fans know him as Dr. Dan Kane in the Reanimator films. They do have a son together who was born in 1990, so he would have been 5 years old at the time of this interview. And so she talks a little bit about that.
And a little cool thing, little acting insight when you listen to the interview. I thought it was really cool when she said that acting, even though it's about memorizing the lines or blocking, it for her, acting is nonverbal, which means the most important thing is to know the emotional and intellectual life of your character. So I don't know.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. So a couple of spoiler alerts, but little teases to get you into our next interview with Kathleen Quinlan.
Haven't done this before? Okay.
No?
Congratulations.
That's surprising. With all the films you've done.
Thank you. I think I did some talk shows a long time ago, probably about 20 years ago. I never sat at a table with many microphones pointing at me.
Speaking about 20 years ago, here you've got to put yourself in the frame of mind of a woman your age 25 years ago.
Yes.
How do you relive the 70s that way? I mean, getting into the hot pink mini dress may help, but just to put yourself into that perspective of what an astronaut's life would be like in the 70s.
I talked to Marilyn Lovell a lot. I was not wearing hot pink miniskirts in the 60s. I was wearing suede jumpsuits with no shoes. And I didn't have to worry so much about the time period, although I considered it a more innocent time, obviously, than we're having now. And talking with her brought home to me that those women were considered part of the program by NASA, and that NASA, in fact, talked with them and said, without saying it, don't talk to your friends about what your husband's going through. Don't talk to family about what's going on in the program. And so they were isolated, although they supported each other. They were a strong unit, the NASA women, but they were not allowed to talk about a lot of things that they do now, apparently.
Did NASA really give wives or families that box that you could actually hear what's going on in the cockpit?
Yeah. Squawk boxes, and Marilyn sat and she listened to it a lot. I found some pictures of her from a Life magazine article, and she was always sort of hunkered down with her ear sort of glued to the squawk box. That's how she kept her little thread of connection with him.
The astronauts, of course, were trained to deal with stress and danger and fear. The wives weren't, but they had to deal with all of that same stuff.
No, it's like a big pot of strange anxiety and fear being dumped at the guys, and they go, okay, now this is how you're going to deal with it as a pilot. And then they dump it at the wives and they say nothing. So it was a lot. Marilyn, I believe, is a person somewhat like myself in that we both have post-reactions to any kind of crisis. That is, at first you deal with it, and then when it's over, you let down and you fall apart into a big pile of mush. And in fact, she told me that after the mission, Jim would say, honey, I'm going to the grocery store, and she couldn't handle it. She would have huge anxiety attacks, and she would really have a very difficult time letting him go out the door. So I think she got a lot of repercussions later.
Was it emotionally draining for you as a character to absorb all that? I mean,
we watched the one liftoff, and it was simulated, of course. It was ditched in later. But what Ron did that was so clever, because you thought, well, here I'm going to look at. Well, first, Jim Lovell took us here. Jim Lovell and Marilyn Lovell. Jim flew us to Houston to see the NASA Space Center. One of the all-time great times of my life. Showed us the rockets, showed us all the modules, everything. So I had some idea of how immense they were. But what Ron did that was so clever was he put us in the bleachers and we looked out to nothing. But he had these huge speakers, like you used to listen to the rock and roll concerts, huge speakers with the sound. And then it shook inside your soul, and you got a feeling of that, and trying to think of all the things that she would have to be going through, because first of all, she did not want to be there, because it just cost too much emotionally. I said to her, I don't know how you did this. I didn't even want to pretend for a day that my husband was there going up into the universe, maybe never to be seen again with 4 kids on the ground.
It was an especially poignant scene, too, when your character goes to her son's bedroom to explain what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
When he called her, she had to keep her cool for the sake of the kids.
For the kids, exactly.
And not panic for the kids.
She said she had one moment where she actually went into the bathroom and cried a lot and prayed. And then after that, she just had to pull herself up because she had 4 kids to attend to. And they always did. The NASA women always, they were the anchor of the household. They said to him, your husband is not going to be around. You are the ones who have to run this household. So they did. I don't know how they did it.
In real life, though, you're the one in the family who goes off and works on films and leaves the family behind.
That's correct.
How do you deal with that?
Well, my husband and I take turns, actually, which is kind of nice. I've chosen to take a lot of work that maybe isn't quite as significant or glamorous, but the location was home, shorter periods of time. Then I don't have to uproot my son quite as much. I don't know what I'm going to do when he gets into kindergarten, but I'll worry about that when I get there. So I'm used to pulling up stakes. I could relate to that gypsy nomad thing, no matter how fancy it might look. You're still a gypsy.
You and Ron Howard have crossed paths. I was thinking of that as you walked in the room past each other. You've crossed paths before. I guess you worked together in American Graffiti.
Yes.
How long ago was that?
That was a long time ago. I'd say 22 years ago.
Do you stay in touch, and do you find yourselves as your careers intersect and change? You're a different person than you were then. He's a different person than he is now. How does it feel when you're back together working in a different role?
Well, it's always exciting, I find, when you come across someone that you enjoyed working with. Now, I think I had one little moment with Ron at the Sock Hop in American Graffiti. And I've always admired Ron's work. I was really excited to get to work with him. And I think he's done such an incredible job on this film, trying to remain true to what the story is and create a film and make it all cohesive. And he was able to do that. So I was really excited to work with him, and I didn't really know what it was going to be like with him as a director. I want to tell you, I don't know how he keeps his eyes on so many things at one time, because there's so many technical things going on there. And he would catch the tiniest moments. He was, oh, let's do that with that moment, and let's do that with that moment. And some directors never even see it. And he was catching things right and left, and I think he really helped me to walk a fine line.
You have a lot of reaction scenes without words where you're looking
my
at
favorite
the sky, or you're sitting there going, you had to do a lot of nonverbal acting and a lot of along the same lines of nonverbal acting scenes. How do you kind of bring something new into those?
Well, from an actor's point of view, most acting is nonverbal. The words come out after you understand what the emotional and intellectual life of the character is, and then the words come. So I was lucky in that spending enough time with Marilyn, I could be really specific about what it was she was feeling or thinking. So you don't just sit there and feel something. There's thoughts, and then there's emotions, or there's emotions and then there's thoughts, or they jam at the same time. And so I knew exactly what she was thinking at those times because I could ask her.
And has she seen any of the finished product?
No, she hasn't, but I'm going to sit with her when she does see it, because I think she's not going to have such an easy time of it.
Is having her as a resource that good or bad? When you're creating a fictional character, you can invent it. Mm-hmm. Now here you obviously feel a responsibility.
I do.
To her. And yet you also want to bring something to the table.
True.
And so as an actor creating a character, what kind of challenge or burden is it to have real life as your source?
I find it to be a big challenge, and I feel the responsibility. I don't take lightly that you're going to take somebody's life and throw it up there on the screen in front of bazillions of people. So, and you never know who you're going to come across. Now, Marilyn happens to be a very intelligent, warm, and gracious woman. There's something very regal about her, but very down-to-earth about her. So she was very accessible, and she was a little trepidatious. She wanted to know exactly, well, what are you going to do, or how does this work? And I would sit down with her and go through all the scenes. And the only thing that I did tell her that I was going to do was I was going to externalize things more than she probably would have, because it's a film and the audience needs to see it. So that was really mostly all that was different as far as I can tell. Now I'll talk to Marilyn and see what she has to say about that. But I feel responsibility towards when you're playing someone's life.
What about playing opposite Tom Hanks? What was that like?
Well, fortunately, working with Tom is like working with a young actor who's just gotten out of acting school. He is still so excited about the process of the work that in spite of everything that's happened with him, he still focuses on the work. And I've worked with actors that have had not even nearly a tenth of what's happened to him in his life. And they're already jaded. They already just go and collect the paycheck and leave. And Tom is still working for the moments. He's working to sculpt a piece. I think he has so much information by now about an astronaut. I think he could probably go up on a mission and they'd talk him through it and he'd do just fine. It's amazing the amount of information he collects for his work.
First actor on the moon, right? But worse.
You were saying that at the time when the film was really taking place, you were in the suede jumpsuits with the bare feet. But did you have a laugh when you saw how you were dressed and made up with
Lord.
eyeshadow?
Oh, I want to talk about terror, about what I was going to look like. Here I'm finally going to be in this big hoop-de-doo movie, and I'm going to be in the ugliest fashions known to man. And I've got to look good. Now, how is this going to work? But Rita Ryak was really good with the costume. She said, don't worry, we're just going to pick the shapes first. And then she made stuff with the new materials. And I mean, we had to weed through some stuff. And the hair, we did reduce the hair by about 3 inches high. You know, it was 3 inches less high than it originally was. And we tried to take it easy on that lovely blue eyeshadow. And they were not clothes that I kept after the movie. Let's just put it that way.
You were talking about how Tom is still excited as an actor. How do you see yourself as an actor? Are you excited, jaded, a little bit of both?
I'm excited. I'm not quite as passionate as he is, I would say. It depends on the subject matter. I'm more quiet as I go about my work. I don't think I'm jaded. Well, maybe I am. To me, I have to say, it's a cross between, sometimes it's a job and sometimes you're sculpting a piece. And sometimes you're sort of doing both. This, to me, was sculpting a piece. And so it was a little more exciting. But I don't, I believe sometimes you get actual sort of missions as an actor, like you would as an astronaut. And then you go, oh, now I've got a mission. Now I'm really excited. And sometimes you get work. It's okay.
Certainly the excitement of someone like Tom Hanks or Ron Howard has got to be contagious for you as well. I mean, it makes you want to maybe take it to another level.
Oh, no, forget it. I'm spoiled rotten now. Completely spoiled. And I've got to take it in stride because it can't be that good all the time. Because Ron's an exceptional director and he's a very gracious person and he knows how to treat actors because he's been an actor. And Tom, even with all his notoriety, is still an actor. And all those guys that I worked with, you know, I didn't get to really work with Gary very much, or Kevin, or Ed, or any of those guys, but just to be part of that whole experience, then that's one for the books. That's one I won't forget very easily.
Did you get to try the white loose?
No, I didn't. Can I complain about this publicly? I did not get to go up in the KC-135, and I almost called Ron when I heard they were going back. But then I'd heard that people, real ucky mucks in Hollywood, you know, the big guys were calling Ron and saying, hey, Ron, can I go on the KC-135 with you? And I said, well, that's not cool, because it's so tight anyway that I didn't want to try to hitch a ride like everybody else, so I had to sit on my hands on that one. I wanted to go and do Space Camp, too. I didn't get to go do Space Camp. I was in after the fact, so.
Do you have a history of learning things and taking things home from the roles that you do?
Only the good things. No, I drop it at the door. I'm not maybe I'm less committed. I don't want to bring it home with me. I don't want to live it 24 hours a day. It's really exciting. See, now I'm a mother. That's the hardest job in the world. Forget it. Making a movie is a walk in the park now. So I get to have a vacation and I get to do some work, like I did in Apollo 13, and then I go home and I work like I've never worked in my life.
The real work begins.
The real work begins, and then I'm hoping soon I'll be working again, so I can have another vacation.
And so you're working at home and you're brought down to earth by the kids, reality. How do the kids or family, how does that keep you grounded?
Well, I do what everybody else does. My husband and I didn't have anybody to help us for the first 4.5 years, so we did it all, except for clean the house. We didn't clean the house, but we did the grocery shopping. We didn't get to go out a whole lot. We did the laundry. We did the cooking. We did pick the kid up, go to the thing, go to the doctor. And then, here, take the kid. I have to run to the meeting. No, you take the kid. I have to run to a meeting. And then I hit burnout. Then it was too much. I had my niece come down from Oregon so I could do Apollo 13, and then she had to go home. And then it got busy, and I said, I can't keep doing all of this, so I have somebody to help me a little bit now.
One of the things the movie deals with is the media's fascination with crises, and that the whole sequence when they're watching the broadcast.
Incredible.
Did you discuss that with Marilyn? What were her thoughts about that? And it was really resonant because it seemed like that's really where the media is now. News, if it's not something awful, they're not interested.
Yes, that's true. I know our level of crises has...
Even stuff that isn't a crisis becomes a crisis as far as the news is concerned.
Well, what was so incredible about that crisis, like the recent crisis with the pilot that was down that just returned, is that all of a sudden everybody became so human, and we crossed all the lines, and it was no more this country, that country, you're at war with us, we're not going to let you do that. It wasn't all that. I'm sorry, it just looks like sibling rivalry to me on a universal level, but everybody was praying for these guys, these 3 guys out there to come back. And when Marilyn would talk, she would start to talk about it. I mean, she just welled up. Because it wasn't to her, I mean, that was her family up there. And not just her husband. I mean, she knew all those guys. They ate dinner together. It would be like if my friends were off somewhere and I couldn't get them back. It would be horrible. And I think somewhere that the world understood that those men were not just doing something just for themselves. They were doing something that would for the entire world. And that to me was incredible, how heartfelt it was across all the political boundaries.
You kept up your stage roots, and I think that that's something that is more and more rare in Hollywood. When people go to film and television, they don't go back to stage. What do you get from it? Why do you feel drawn to do stage work?
I get my butt kicked. I do. I was a competitive athlete for years, and I don't know anything as an actor that will work you out harder. And I'm not entirely comfortable in that world, and so it really pushes me to stretch. And I don't know everything, so I'm forced to learn a lot of things in order to survive. I haven't been back for a long time because of my son.
And that's where the tape ended. That would happen sometimes when you were recording to the cassette tape and it would just stop. You'd hear the click, it would pop up, and you'd reach to turn the tape over, and right then that's when they say, okay, that was the last question, bye everybody. And there would be no reason to start recording again on the other side because it was over and there's nothing more to get. So it sounded like it was kind of an abrupt stop, but it was already over. That was 18 and a half minutes. That's the same length as all the others, so that's the whole thing. We just didn't get the goodbye.
Goodbye.
Oh.
Does that work? Can you put that in?
Greg, are you leaving?
No, I mean, I just could put me in for Quinlan.
Oh, okay. The only other thing I wanted to say about her, Kathleen Quinlan was nominated for an Oscar for this role, but she lost it to Mira Sorvino in Mighty Aphrodite.
Okay, so now next up is Gary Sinise, who best known, I guess, he first got into our public consciousness for his performance in Forrest Gump. He received an Oscar nomination for his role as Lieutenant Dan.
Right.
So that was back in 1994, but we're not talking about 1994. We're talking about the following year, Apollo 13. This is another film that actually solidified his status as an actor.
Right, and of course he was in Forrest Gump with Tom Hanks, and here he's with Tom Hanks again, but they didn't have any scenes together.
Very interesting.
I mean, they were telling 2 different stories, so even though they're both in the movie, it wasn't as a pair this time. Now, a few episodes ago on our GoldenEye episode, we talked about agenda questions, and I told you all about the Beatles question. And I mentioned that there was a period of time when the question changed into a yesterday question. It was the 30th anniversary of the song Yesterday, and so it was my job to get celebrities to talk about how much they love that song. Well, hold on to your hats, because it's time now for the yesterday question. Hope you guys enjoy it as much as I enjoyed asking it.
That seemed genuine, Matt. You know what? You did a good job with the Beatles stuff. But you know what? Also, along with the value-added content of the Beatles song Yesterday in the interview, there's some really great information about the forming of the Steppenwolf Theater. Gary Sinise was one of the founding partners of it.
Yeah, actually, I have some of that information right here. This was an ensemble company in Chicago that he co-founded in 1974, along with several other actors, including Laurie Metcalf and John Malkovich. Some of the other actors who cut their teeth doing plays at the Steppenwolf include Joan Allen, Gary Cole, John Mahoney, and Martha Plimpton. One of their first of many major successes to grow beyond Chicago was their 1982 production of Sam Shepard's True West, which starred Gary Sinise and John Malkovich and was directed by Sinise, and it transferred to Off-Broadway in New York. Then in 1994, Steppenwolf made its Los Angeles debut with Steve Martin's first play, Picasso at the Lapin Agile. I hope I pronounced that right.
Lapin Agile.
All right, then.
I just guessed.
Oh, Well, so I may have been right. We'll never know. Folks, write to us and tell us how it's pronounced.
I like La Panagile.
All right, then.
Okay.
The theater company is still going strong today, and as you'll hear in this interview, it never stopped being a priority for Sinise. And the last thing I wanted to say about him is shortly after this junket, his HBO movie Truman premiered, and that's where he played the starring role of Harry S. Truman. So he does talk a little bit about that, as well as his stuff about Apollo 13.
And going back to your deep dive on the Vomit Comet, there's some Sinise comments about his experiences with the Vomit Comet, but I do not want to give away any spoilers for the interview.
And by the way, the phrase deep dive on the Vomit Comet is something no one should ever say.
Please remember those phrases as you dive into the latest interview or this interview with Gary Sinise.
All right, then.
No comment on that.
One of those now, are you?
Since we're not all here yet, I've got a...
Just a little water.
I got a... Greg, no, you know what I've got. I've got a question out of left field that I gotta get out of the way. We're doing a show on the 30th anniversary of the Beatles song Yesterday. Do you have any thoughts on the song, any memories associated with it?
Pardon me?
The Beatles song Yesterday, it's the 30th anniversary. Do you have any thoughts on the song? What does the song mean to you?
The 30th anniversary of Yesterday. There's always an anniversary for something, isn't there? I wouldn't know what to say about that. No. You know, it's a good song. Still a good song. It was a good song yesterday. It's a good song today.
So I heard you were in a movie.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
We'll get to that too. Yeah.
It seems as though your character, Mattingly, was given the most character development. We really got a chance to get to know you the best, and of course you're the odd man out in terms of the action that's happening. How did you feel toward the responsibility to the real person, but also the sense that you wanted to be able to develop this character as yourself, or as your own?
Well, you know, he's kind of a composite of a bunch of people, actually. Some of the things that happened in the movie didn't actually happen. He didn't go home and drink Budweiser and watch Dick Cavett and some of those things, you know. we kind of, that's a movie scene. But we had, you know, we got very interested in the idea of the fourth astronaut, the guy who's left behind and seemingly has nothing to do until he's needed again, and then becomes a critical part of getting them back. And I was very interested in that part. When Ron asked me to come in and audition, he said pick any one of the three guys, you know, other than Lovell, of course, and just come in and read whichever one you want, and then we'll talk about it. And I picked Ken and went in and read for him because I like that storyline of the guy who's so much a part of it and so committed, and then is left behind because of the speculation, really, and becomes a really necessary part of getting them back.
Did you feel any of the regret, perhaps, when they say to your character, "You're not going," whereas you're picking the character, and, you know, knowing you're not going to do the weightless scenes, you're not going to go put the spacesuit on, you're not going to do all that stuff, but the character was worth it. Was there a kind of
I got to put the spacesuit on one time and get my picture taken, you know, and then I got to be in a nightmare scene, you know, and so I did have my spacesuit on, but that was it, you know. And I wanted to have it. You know, I guess I was really sad when it was over because it was such a fun job, and we all got along so well and really had a good communication there.
Why was it
Did you ever, as a little
job?
kid, even entertain the idea of being an astronaut?
Not really. I was fascinated with it. I remember certain images from it, but I don't remember much about this particular mission. I know that when I think back, you know, when it was going on, I knew it was going on and this and that, but I was preoccupied with girls and, you know, rock and roll and, you know, all that other stuff. So I was 15 and, you know, I wasn't an astro nerd or anything like that.
Were you a nerd at all when you were younger?
Well, everybody goes through kind of a nerd period, I think, but I was more of a, I was an athlete when I was younger, played a lot of football and baseball, and then got really into rock and roll and theater eventually in high school, and drama and all that.
Speaking of rock and roll, what do you think of the music in the movie? Have you seen the movie?
Yeah.
How do you feel like the music fits in it, especially got Jimi Hendrix and...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of record players and radios playing in the background. It's all good. It's all good.
Any particular favorite people on the? You got Pete Townsend and Steppenwolf and Hendrix and...
Yeah, I was playing all that when this stuff was going on. Yeah, I was playing all that music.
How do you think it adds to the movie itself, or today? What is this the music and the era that it comes from add to the movie itself for people watching it today?
Well, it was so much a part of the period, that you can't get away with it. You'd have to have it to accurately be a part of the world, and we're really trying to create a period here, 25 years ago, that I think that's all a part of it, that makes the environment, feel accurate.
You said you were playing it. Were you playing it, or were you playing it?
Playing it.
You were in a band?
Yeah.
Tell me about
I had
it.
bands all over the place. Yeah, I played in bands from the time I was in 4th grade to up until I was about 21 or 22, when I really decided to separate myself from music and really bear down on theater, which I started my own theater in Chicago, Steppenwolf Theater, and at a certain point, it really became difficult to just kind of split the focus and do both things. So I really had to kind of drop the music thing and just bear down on theater. And we built a theater that now is we have an $8 million building, and it was something that we stuck out. And it was all worth it, but I still have all my guitars, and I don't get to. I've got 3 kids, so I don't get to pull them out very often. But I had all kinds of bands. I saw myself like Mick Jagger, Mark Farner and Grand Funk, and
What was your favorite guitar? Do you have still a favorite?
Hendrix. Yeah, Hendrix.
You have a Strat?
I do. I have a Strat. I have a Telecaster. He's a rocker here, man. Yeah, I have a synthesizer, and for a while there, I was a bass player, and then I got really into jazz for a while and played a lot of jazz. Had a jazz quartet that we traveled around Illinois, playing all around. But then acting just really took over, and I sort of stopped.
And you're going back to Steppenwolf for the anniversary, the 20th anniversary.
Yeah, I'm directing the first play, Shepherd play, called Buried Child, in the fall. Opens October 1st.
What's it like going back? You say you were there at the beginning. You founded it, and now it's an $8 million building and an institution in Chicago.
Yeah, what's it like going back? Well, I haven't been a part of the day-to-day inner workings of the theater. I'm on a broad scale. I'm on an executive level as an advisor, and we have an artistic executive board of directors made up of the 3 founders of the theater. So we kind of deal with things on a executive level. But when I go back, it's great and peculiar, because the place that we own, that we have now, is not something that I have been at on a day-to-day basis. So it's wonderful to know that the place that started when I was 18 years old and has developed into this huge thing and this great facility. But at the same time, I haven't been there on a daily basis for the past 7 years.
What do you think it's meant to the culture, when you think of the Midwest theater, you think Guthrie in Minneapolis, Steppenwolf in Chicago. It's really come to represent something. Is that what you envisioned when you founded it?
I founded it when I was 18 years old, so I couldn't say, I envisioned, that. But what we did envision was having control over our own work and being able to do our own thing. And it just kept on going and growing and growing, and people kept staying with it, and we were doing something special, and I think everybody had a sense that we were, as actors, in something together that was ours, and that nobody else could interfere with. And that also we were, because of the support system that we had, we were developing and changing and growing, and a lot of the people that are involved, some of them might even say that without it they wouldn't even be in the business. I know Laurie Metcalf has said that, on occasion. She probably wouldn't have become an actor or gone into acting if she didn't have this group of people to go to, because going off and pursuing your own individual career means is one thing, and but knowing that you have this little basement to go to with a bunch of friends where you can create your own little theater is kind of this security blanket that was real protective at the time. So it's nice that it's still there, and we're gonna keep trying to make it better.
Does the name have any musical significance, or was it?
No. It's from the book, the novel.
So you're going back to direct. What do you get from directing that you don't get from acting, or is it the balance you like to?
Well, I do both. That's what I do, and sometimes I connect to something on a directing level, and can see it on a broad scale visually, or just have a kind of sense about it as a director that I don't have as an actor. But on the other hand, most of the things that I've directed are things that I would want to be in. I see them as an actor, from an actor's point of view, and that's the kind of director I am, one who works with actors. I've never been the kind of director who just looks at a piece and sees this whole kind of concept and, just wants to do my conceptual thing and all that. I really like to get down and dirty with the actors and create the piece with them.
Do you have to adjust your approach to a role when you're in a very, very large studio picture like this or Forrest Gump versus when you're in a smaller picture or a play?
No.
Or is it the role,
No.
the essence of the role is just...
Yeah, I think you just play the part. You're just trying to do the best you can with the part, and you prepare, as much as you can. So much of film acting is in the preparation, because you don't get the trial and error rehearsal period that you do in theater. In theater, you rehearse for 3 weeks in a room like this or whatever, or sit around the table for like this, with the cast, and drink coffee and read the script for 3 days and just kind of start to get it. And then you move the table out of the way and set up some chairs that might reflect the set, and you start moving around with the script in your hand and saying the things over and over, and it starts to get into your blood. Then you finally memorize the lines, get rid of the script, then you add the lights and the sound and the set, move around. Then you add the audience, and you do 2 weeks of previews or something. So you're continually going over and over the same thing until it's in your blood. In film, very rarely do you have the opportunity to rehearse something like that. You have to come in knowing what you're going to do with it when you get there, and it's all in the preparation. So much of it. So there's a pretty big difference usually in how you approach movie acting as opposed to theater, but no real difference to me in the role in a big movie or a small movie.
Well, the preparation here, of course, involved a lot of technical, education you guys had to undergo. How much did you have to learn about the interior of that space capsule, and did you get to go up and do the weightless stuff, even though you weren't in those scenes?
Yeah, we went to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama, and did the space camp thing, and then we flew over here and spent time here, touring and talking to astronauts. And we went up in the KC-135, and I went up there. And that was the first time we all went up there, and that's when Ron got the idea to, let's see if this cargo door, let's open the cargo door and see if we can put a set in here. And they worked it out with NASA that we could actually shoot in the zero-G plane, and So they put the set in there, and that saved them a lot of special effects trouble in there, because they could actually have real weightlessness in the movie.
You heard that you learned the nickname firsthand, though, of that jet.
The barf ship. Yeah. Or the vomit comet, whatever you want. But, yes, it is appropriately named the vomit comet, and I left my mark inside that ship.
Can you describe the experience?
Huh?
Can you describe the experience?
Leaving his mark inside the ship. It was messy.
Well, they give you barf bags, so because you don't want anything floating around in there, So they give you some barf bags. All right, the vomit stuff.
For those of us who haven't been weightless, which is probably all of us except for you, what's it like?
It's surreal. I remember the first time. What it is it's the plane. The plane goes up and does parabolas, these rolly motions. It climbs very steeply, and then drops very very steeply for about 25 seconds. And during that period where the plane is falling faster than you are, before it levels off, you go into weightlessness. And it did that 50 times. It was only supposed to do it 40. And I would have been okay if Ron wouldn't have talked him into doing 10 more. I would have been all right. But the first time it actually happened, there were a lot of NASA folks out there in the plane. There's about 20 seats in the back of the plane, and then the rest of the interior is gutted and padded, and has these very bright lights all the way down the plane that come on right before it goes weightless. So these bright lights come on and illuminate the interior of the plane. And these NASA folks were out there setting up experiments, because they were going up there to do zero gravity experiments with different things in there, various machines and things that they were checking out. And so they were all ready for the weightlessness, and we were all still strapped into our seats because we wanted to just kind of feel what it was like a few times. They said, take it slow. We're going to be up here for a while. You don't have to jump out of your seat and start spinning around. Otherwise, you won't last. And none of us wanted to get sick. So we stayed in our seats to just get a fix on it. But the first time, you're sitting in these seats, and it's like a little theater almost. You're sitting there. Yeah, all right. So you're sitting.
I love the hand motion.
All right, you're sitting there in this theater. And, it's almost like a padded theater over here, right? And you're sitting back there, and the lights come on and illuminate the set, and people start floating in front of you. And so it was the most bizarre little piece of theater that I could see. People are spinning around. Somebody was flicking water out of a water bottle, and so the beads of water are just floating in the air and, splashing off our faces. And we're all like, whoa, watching these people float around. And then the plane levels off and everybody hits the floor. And then it starts to climb again. And so the G-forces really press you down. And it started to do that. We rode out another one, and then I undid my seatbelt and got out first. And then everybody else started flying through the air and doing somersaults and standing on the ceiling. And we were pretty crazy up there. Yeah.
Coming back down to Earth, how's Truman?
Well, I'm done shooting, and it's airing September 9th on HBO, and it was a wonderful experience to play him.
This is during the independence years, is that?
Yeah. Well, it takes him from 1917 to 1953. And so I play him from about 30 years old, early 30s to late 60s. And there's a whole makeup job and, a whole thing. Got to wear a lot of great suits.
What kind of character is he to get into?
Boy, he's a fascinating character. This is about Apollo 13, but, just briefly, it's based on the David McCullough book. And it's a very emotional book, actually. You really get a sense of this ordinary guy who never went to college, who was very non-self-oriented, unusual today, and somebody who's totally unmaterialistic and never owned his own house, who ended up in the White House. And that's really remarkable. There's a scene in the story when he first becomes president, reluctantly, never wanted to be president, never wanted to be vice president, and found himself in the White House 80 days after he became vice president. And there's a scene where he's walking through the White House with his wife for the first time, and she says, isn't this something? This is our first house that we've had together. And so they're in the White House, and he leaves the White House and goes back to live in his mother-in-law's house after he's in the presidency. So here's a guy who never owned his own home, who was president of the United States. And that's just one little anecdote about this guy's life story. It's really unusual and almost could never, I just don't see that happening now. The kinds of decisions he had to make were decisions that were very, very difficult and really have affected the last 50 years in a big way.
Why do you have to act? Why do you have to express yourself? What does that fulfill for you?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's a. I don't know. I've done it so long.
What do you discover about yourself? What have you discovered about yourself that has surprised you in the acting that you've done? Personal thing.
Well, one thing is I never think I'm that good. I always have to ask my wife. If she thinks it's good, or there's always this thing in me that I can be a lot better, and that so I keep having to reprove that. There's something about it that makes me keep wanting to come back to it and keep trying and keep challenging and to do it as well as people that I've admired in the past who have done it well. So.
Do you think that Academy Award nomination helped you along that way to being validated?
Well. What it has done is made things a little bit easier because I probably get more opportunities because of it that I wouldn't have had if that hadn't come along.
Your next movie will be with Tom Hanks.
What fan reaction? You ever get?
You know what? I don't know if it will, but I wouldn't mind. We get along great.
You ever get double takes because you're actually walking? People see.
Yeah.
Magic.
Oh, you have legs. Yeah, magic legs.
Congratulations.
I was at the White House.
So this is after you've done Truman, though, so you had a chance to go into the real place.
Yeah, that was kind of bizarre because we shot in the Oval Office in the Truman Library. So we used that Oval Office, but I was saying when I was walking around the White House how strange it was that I had just played Harry Truman. Here I am in a place that he lived.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, folks, we're back. That was a really cool Gary Sinise interview. Now you know if he actually did barf during the vomit comment, which he did. I'm not spoiling anything because that's little postscript stuff.
Thanks for bringing that back up.
Deep diving with that.
As well as his lunch.
Wait, yeah, next up for us is Kevin Bacon. Obviously, we all know Kevin Bacon for Cut Loose, Footloose. That's the alternate title for the movie, Cut Loose, Footloose.
Yeah, that one where he kicked out his Sunday shoes.
Yes, Kevin Bacon has had such a great career. I mean, we can list our own favorite Kevin Bacon performances in films, and there's the eight degrees or whatever of Kevin Bacon stuff. It's ad nauseum.
Everyone is related to him in some way. And in fact, if you're listening to the show right now, you are now 2 steps away because we interviewed him.
Oh, yes. You know what I thought little spoiler stuff before this interview. Obviously, he talks a lot about Apollo 13. I was really interested in the postscript regarding Murder in the First. I remember around that time. That's a film I really championed, and did you love that film as well, Matt?
I did. Great movie.
Yes, and here's the thing: Apollo 13. You're going to get a lot of stuff from this interview, but you're also going to get a lot of stuff regarding his own disappointment with Murder in the First, which co-starred him and Christian Slater and Gary Oldman. Listeners, if
nobody's seen that movie, and you should
track Murder in the First down. That's a big part of this interview as well. I also really appreciated the stuff that Bacon talks about his actor's life, about the lull before each project that he gets. Matt,
you know what I appreciated is that he gave a much better answer to the Beatles Yesterday question than Gary Sinise did.
Oh,
so
really?
Points for that.
Kevin Bacon, better karma for Kevin Bacon for that one.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So why don't we get to it then?
Here's Kevin Bacon.
All right, before we get started, I got a question out of left field, so let's get it out of the way.
Okay.
We're doing a show on the 30th anniversary of the Beatles song Yesterday. Do you have any thoughts on the song?
Scrambled eggs.
Okay.
Oh, guys. What?
Well, you know that story, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it the most covered song in history? So I'm just saying a bunch of stuff you know. So frankly, what are my feelings about the song? Well, I think it's a beautiful song, and it's funny that it's been covered so much because I've never heard anybody really do it, well, except for McCartney. It's a classic McCartney song, and it's great. I love the Beatles. They can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned.
And while we're speaking of music, could you comment a bit on the? Have you seen the movie?
Yeah.
Can you comment about the music in the movie and how that adds to the atmosphere and setting the scene, and specifically maybe some of the songs that you like, the artists that you like?
Yeah, I think it's really neat, the music in the movie, and it was a great time actually. When we were doing the party scene, the sound man had an amazing collection of records that were out around 1970, and he just kept playing them one after another to get people into the kind of party scene. I don't know if you've ever been on a set when they use music, but basically you turn it up right before people are going to start talking. Everybody sort of gets into the feeling, then you crank it down so that you can record the dialogue without running over it and having to loop. And it was a neat time, music-wise. I think who was it that they brought up? He's got one song on there. Oh no, I'm not gonna remember.
Do you need the press kit?
It was.
We got facts. We got.
Oh, okay.
Comment on anything you want to comment on. We do a lot of music stuff.
And in addition to that, Annie Lennox did a vocal performance.
Yeah, Trini Lopez. Trini Lopez is the guy that they really dug. He was the guy that they brought up, and I thought that was a really funny use of that lemon tree. Of course, Spirit of the Sky was a great song. Such good stuff. Yeah, I'd like to get this record.
What about Jimi Hendrix and him at all?
Yeah, totally into Hendrix, and totally into the Rascals. I thought they were one of the greatest, blue-eyed soul bands that there were. They weren't really around for all that long, but I was a big Rascals fan. So
You didn't have the ability to talk to the guy you were playing. He was no longer alive.
Right.
What did you feel in terms of a sense of responsibility to his true story, his legacy, versus the dramatic element and what you bring to the party?
Well, I felt a responsibility to him and to his memory, but also to astronauts in general. I think there are a certain kind of person, a certain breed of man, certainly during the Apollo days, they have a lot of strength, a lot of calm, a lot of integrity, a lot of focus. And the way my character was originally written, he was, they kind of took that Playboy bachelor idea and just ran with it. And I felt like I really wanted to pull that back a lot, because the guy that they had presented was not a guy who would have made it through the space program anyway. And it's true Jack was a bachelor, and it's true that he did have a lot of girlfriends, and they all had a sort of a fun lifestyle, and it was a fun time to live in. But he was also an amazingly skilled pilot,
and knew a tremendous amount about all the systems. Lovell was, in fact, happy to have him, on board. So I wanted to find something else to be the hook, although I wanted to keep that element of, obviously, a bachelor, because it was an unusual and kind of nice thing. And the hook that Ron and I sort of came upon was being the new guy and trying to fit into this situation. I did what I could in terms of whenever I ran into any people who were from the Apollo program, whether they be the astronauts or the wives themselves, to get whatever information I can from them on Jack. And I had a really nice audio taped interview that he had done with Al Reinhardt, I think, about the mission and about what it was like to be in space. And that was very helpful to me. The only real video I had of him was a Tonight Show appearance that the three of them did. It was actually kind of fun. I wish somebody would dig that up one of these days. Maybe if I do the Tonight Show, they can find it, because it was Hayes and Lovell and Swigert with Johnny. And he spent almost the whole show on the Apollo 13.
Can you talk about the space camp? This has to be one of the most intense training periods for a film that you've ever done.
It was the most intense. Yeah, we went. We had about. Well, the initial training period was about 2 weeks. Huntsville, Alabama, and space camp. We had actual. They don't have an Apollo simulator, but they have a shuttle simulator, and it's very similar to what you see in the movie. You get in there, you have a simulated mission. They throw glitches at you. You try to work the systems out, and try not to crash the bird. It was, I guess, 2 hours or something. We were in there. And I was the pilot, and Tom was a commander, and just like the normal deal. So actually, they have 5 people on board. They have some. They have 2 specialists, which Gary and is there somebody else there? I'm trying to think. I know Bill was there, but well, anyway. So that was really intense. We also got a chance to fly planes, because they all were pilots. They all started out as pilots, so they thought, well, how about we just give them a little flying lesson? And I didn't realize you can have a flying lesson one day and be flying the plane the same day. We sat down in a room for an hour, and they'd let us take airplanes up, which was pretty amazing, and landing them and taking off. Then it was a lot of information to absorb in a fairly quick amount of time. So it was very, very exhausting. And then we ended up in Houston here in the Space Center and Ellington Field for the KC-135 flight. But our training was really ongoing, because we had Dave Scott, who was an Apollo astronaut, who was our technical advisor and was on the set all the time. And pretty much every day before we'd get into a sequence of scenes or one scene, we'd sit down with a mock-up of the panel and go through and break down exactly what was happening, technologically in the course of this scene, what was happening to the spacecraft, what was happening to the systems, what was powered up, what was not powered up, and go through which buttons we were hitting and why. And that's really the only way to do it. You couldn't have really fudged all that. I mean, you would have looked like an idiot, so.
When you were a little kid, did you ever entertain the thought of maybe being an astronaut, or were you fascinated with space travel?
No. I was not fascinated with space travel. I never entertained the idea of being an astronaut. I don't remember Apollo 13 at all. I remember 11. But I was fascinated with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and, just rock and roll and girls.
You were probably with Ed Harris at the time. He said he didn't.
He said the same thing.
He said the same thing?
He was hanging out with doing other things.
Yeah, other things.
How many times did you die in the simulator?
We didn't die. We didn't die in the simulator. The simulation that we did, we got through it successfully, and then they have a briefing afterwards where they tell you how you did, and they said we figured out the problem, we did okay.
So you guys ready to head up now?
I'll tell you, I think Tom could fly the shuttle. I really do. I'm not ready. I mean, I just don't have a mind that really works that way. That is that technical. Science, math, when I was a kid, it was a nightmare for me. I mean, I couldn't wait to get out of school, you know, especially because of those two subjects. But Tom, you know, he knew a lot about the space program before he was even involved in the movie. And, you know, for instance, we get to situations where Ron would say, leave the camera rolling and say, hey, just ad-lib some stuff now that you're saying to Mission Control and some jobs that you want to do for Mission Control. And he'd just all of a sudden go off into some, you know, long ad-lib about, you know, how he's going to, you know, configure the RCS, and, you know, he's checking the gimbal angles and all this kind of stuff. I'd be like, dude, how did you think of that stuff? My secret was I just get on and go, yeah, roger that, Houston. Gotcha. Right away. Will do. You know, it's just so we'd always make them do the talking, the imaginary talking.
Well, what about the weightlessness?
What about it?
How was that? What kind of experience was that? How was that going through all that? And did you burning
a pole?
Well, the weightlessness was interesting because we had two sort of separate things. The first one was a flight that we took just to experience it, and I thought it was just a once-in-a-lifetime deal. This was before it was even presented to us that we would be filming up there. And the option was left open that, you know, if I wanted to experience it, I could. Of course, I kind of got shamed into it because everybody else was doing it. You know, I didn't want to be the only guy that was too scared. Although, I mean, I was, you know, terrified. Then, you know, Ron said that he was toying with the idea of actually building a set and shooting up there. And I, you know, was surprised, to say the least. So we ended up being pretty good at it. Figuring out a way to shoot a movie in that kind of a situation is a very, very unusual thing. It takes a tremendous amount of toll on your body, though, physically, because we would do about 40 parabolas in the morning and break, and then do about 40 in the afternoon. We ended up doing over 600 to get the shots that we had. And that kind of it has its ups and downs, so to speak. You're also taking drugs, which are pretty intense to try to combat the sickness. I know that Bill and Tom tried one day to go without them, and they were sorry that they had. Not all of us you know, in terms of the sickness, I will say that while not all of us in the crew and in the cast actually hurled, every man-jack among us was sick at one time or another. You know, you just don't do that many parabolas and not have your moments of queasiness. We were just kind of lucky in that we didn't actually throw up. I got thrown up on. I had a cameraman, you know, who had been doing fine for, you know, 10 days of shooting, just all of a sudden lose it. You know, it's just kind of strange when because he lost it during 0G, so it was floating, and I saw it floating, and it was like on me. It's kind of a drag.
Was your body able to take enough of a rest between Murder in the First and this project?
Yeah, I had quite a bit of time off to get myself back together after Murder in the First and put a little more weight on, and you know, we had a really good. I mean, we had one of the nicest perks for me because I like to exercise that I've ever seen on a movie, and that was we had a trailer with a gym in it. So rather than trying desperately to either go to the gym or find a gym or try to drive someplace at lunch, we could work out during lunch or come a little bit early to work, or if we had a break. And it had weights and a you know, Stairmaster and a Life Cycle and a treadmill, and there was a guy who would train us if we wanted to, so we got into that. It was fun.
One of the things that's most amazing to people who watched it last night was when the crisis was going on and you guys are in the cockpit, how is it that you guys, the characters that you played, didn't panic? Because anyone else that far away from, even if you're just 30,000 feet on an airplane, is one thing, but you're in outer space, and how do you come to understand the fact they didn't lose it?
Yeah, well, every minute of every hour that these guys train is focused on this particular kind of situation. They are trained not to panic, and they are trained to put the fear of death out of their mind temporarily and focus on the systems, focus on the problem, and breaking down the problem so that you can find a solution. It's what they're made to do, and they also they're not very forthcoming about what might have actually been going on emotionally, inside them while they were up there. So we decided to, in subtle ways, kind of put those pieces together. And we didn't want a bunch of, screaming, babbling idiots up there, but we tried to fit it in and put little moments of fear and tension between the guys, and longing for home, and just working it in subtle ways. And that's what these guys do.
What do you suppose goes through their minds, or went through their minds during the re-entry, where they really did have to either turn their will over or whatever, where it really was a decisive moment?
Well, I think, the interesting thing about re-entry is that it's such an intense experience, physically anyway, that you're probably in some sort of other zone. I mean, I don't think you really even have time. You're experiencing such intense G-forces to really think, well, I mean, I think they probably got that far and just went, well, it's in God's hands now. I mean,
that you look at when you're looking at roles.
Well, I felt like, yeah, you're right. I mean, while I'm really proud of the work in Apollo 13, and I loved playing the character, it's not on the page, a similar kind of fireworks character like Murder in the First. But the story is so fantastic, and the project was of a size and an importance that you just don't find. I mean, it's not that often that you're able to really get a chance to present a real piece of American history. You don't get a chance to do that often, and so it was exciting in that way. Plus, I was dying to work with Ron and dying to work with Tom, and I just jumped on the rocket ship. And
sometimes when I talk to directors, they talk about fear of going into a project, the magnitude of it. With a role like Murder in the First, something like that's that intense. When you take it on and you sign on the dotted line, you go, I have to do this now. And what sort of goes through? Is it like a roller coaster sort of? How do you prepare for that?
Yeah, it's funny. You have a feeling. There's a lot of excitement that builds up in anticipation of, starting the work and committing to the film. And because it always is a big commitment, you kind of go, wow, now I have to really trust in these people, and you can always find some reason not to do it, And then you get into making the deal, and that's always its own kind of, craziness. And then you sign, and there's actually, once I commit to a movie, before I start, I sort of crash a little bit, I kind of feel a little, I feel nervous, and apprehensive and sort of strange, strangely sad. I don't really know why, until I actually I get that first day of rehearsal over, and I've sat around the table or whatever, and I've said the first lines, and everybody's heard me say them, and I've met the people, and it feels like it's going to be okay, and then I start to get jazzed again and get back into it. There's this weird lull right before the storm.
There must be some sense of mixed emotion, too, with Murder in the First, for instance. I'm sure you had to feel the excellence of the performance, because it was just a superb performance in a role that literally strips you bare, literally and figuratively. And then the audience didn't turn out for it. And it didn't get the kind of award recognition that I think all of us expected it to.
Right.
How do you deal with that? How do you put that behind you and go on to the next thing?
Well, it was hard. It was really hard with Murder in the First. I mean, for one thing, in anticipation of a film coming out, I'm in this position now, in a similar kind of, not similar, but I'm in the same position now with Apollo 13. You have people tell you things, and people whisper in your ear, with Murder in the First, everybody was saying, oh yeah, what a performance, and the scores are high and people are testing it, and all this kind of stuff that you can't help but fall victim to, even as many times as I've been down that road. The studio themselves, saying to me, oh, this is you're gonna get an Oscar and all this kind of crap. As much as you try to hold back from buying into that line, you can't help but get there. And then turned out that they, decided not to release it until January, and then nobody goes. And you sort of feel like, well, I just kind of closed that chapter in my life. And there was as much as I'd like to say, oh, I just enjoyed the experience, I did it because I wanted people to see it. And it's very distressful for anything I've ever done, for it not to do well. I want the movies to do well. I'm, not afraid to admit that.
Are there still people coming up to you right now and saying that they thought your performance was excellent?
Yeah, there are people that have seen it. Yeah, people that have come up, and it's going to come out on video, and a lot of times it lives another life there. Some of my movies, had no life at all in the theater, and found an audience on video. So that's a whole other world, which see how it goes.
What are you working on now? What's next for you?
I'm doing a movie that I'm directing for Showtime with Helen Mirren and Kira Sedgwick, my wife, and it's called Losing Chase, and we're going to shoot it this summer in Canada. I'm just scouting and casting and doing stuff like that now.
What's it about it? Yeah.
It's about a woman who is coming out of a mental institution. She's living on Martha's Vineyard with her family and her 2 kids and her husband, and she hires an au pair to come and take care of her for the summer and cook and take care of the kids and clean, and it's about their relationship. A very, arty kind of thing, actors talking to each other.
But directing Kira, that should be an interesting experience.
Yeah, directing Kira and directing Helen should be an interesting experience too. I think it'll be. I don't think I'm going to have a lot of leisure time. Let me put it that way.
And is that, the arty kind of actors talking movie more available through the Showtime venue, like the cable venue, as opposed to?
Well, I would say the chances are they would tend to, greenlight this kind of a movie maybe easier than the studio, because even on a small scale, a Miramax, Samuel Goldwyn kind of scale, it doesn't have, aside from Helen and Kira and whoever we get for the husband, it doesn't have things that are immediately marketable, because there's little or no sex. Hey, come on in. There's little or no sex. Car crashes, violence. It's not violent, it's people talking. So.
No spaceships.
No spaceships.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Okay, so that was Kevin Bacon. A couple of things I wanted to say about that. He talked about a movie that he was about to direct for Showtime called Losing Chase, starring his wife, Kira Sedgwick. That was his directorial debut. He didn't direct again until 2005, which was another movie starring his wife, Kira Sedgwick, called Loverboy. And then he directed 4 episodes of the TV show The Closer. Greg, can you guess who starred on that show?
Kira Sedgwick?
Yeah, very good.
Nice. Do I win something for that?
No.
Okay.
Read into the Freudian subtext of that what you will, but that more or less is Kevin Bacon's directorial career. Also, just to fill in the gap, he said right at the end that for Losing Chase, he wasn't sure yet who he was going to cast as the husband. That role wound up going to Beau Bridges. So, anything more you want to say about Kevin Bacon there, Greg?
That's all I want to say about Kevin Bacon.
All right. Well, that is the end of part 1 of Apollo 13. Part 2 is going to feature Ed Harris, director Ron Howard, and Tom Hanks. So we hope that you'll join us for that.
Tom Hanks is the star of the movie?
No, he just had a cameo.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
But he was nice enough to show up at the junket and talk about it.
He's a kind man.
He is. He's kind of a man. So before we go, of course, we got to do our plugs. Our webpage, which is...
Matt and Greg podcast
.com.
And
our Facebook page is
Matt and Greg podcast.
No, that's
Matt and Greg interview movie
else.
stars.
No, that's the name of the
Matt
show.
Matt and Greg.
That's us.
Yes, Facebook.com/what?
Facebook.com/Matt and Greg.
Matt and Greg.
So please join us in both places.
Please, subscribe to all our platforms. Please, listeners, give us your honest opinions of the show. I know probably your opinions will be like more Matt, less Greg, which is great. But please email us.
That's always my opinion.
Yes, thank you. A very good, educated opinion. We will be back next episode for Apollo 13 Part 2.
Right, Apollo 14.
Apollo 14. Till then, folks.
See ya.
We now return you to your regularly scheduled lives.